At my promotion dinner, my sister took my husband's hand and said I'm pregnant. They expected me to break down and give them half my wealth in the divorce. Instead, I pulled out an envelope they never knew existed. Their faces turned ghost white. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. The low, confident buzz of the gilded steer was the same, but this time, it felt like a soundtrack to an execution. My husband, Trevor, sat across from me, his face a mask of practiced sincerity. Beside him, my younger sister, Deirdre, was practically glowing. She kept placing a protective hand on her small, noticeable baby bump, looking at Trevor like he was a prize she had just won at the state fair. They were relaxed, smiling. They thought this was their victory lap. Trevor cleared his throat, leaning forward, placing his elbows on the heavy oak table. He adopted the earnest, sincere expression he used when he was trying to close a sale on a top-of-the-line Lincoln. So, he began, exchanging a quick, confident glance with Deirdre. It was clear they had rehearsed this. About the divorce. We wanted to propose doing everything amicably. You know, no mess, no fuss. We think the fairest way, the only fair way, is to just divide things right down the middle. I just watched him over the rim of my water glass. I said nothing. He took my silence as agreement and gained momentum. We can get the condo appraised and sell it, then split the proceeds 50-50ths. The investments, too. We can just liquidate them and divide it all up. Simple. Community property, right? Deirdre chimed in, her voice sweet and reasonable. We think that's the only fair way, Carolyn. You two built a life together, after all. And then, Trevor went for the kill. And, you know, he said, his tone becoming a little more serious, with your new promotion and that fantastic new salary, we were thinking some temporary alimony would really help. Just until I can get stabilized with Deirdre and the baby. It would just be for a year or two, just to help us get on our feet. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking nerve of it was almost impressive. He wanted me to pay him alimony while he started a new life with my sister. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. Then, I slowly reached into my purse, my movements calm and deliberate. They both watched me, their eyes gleaming with anticipation, like two hungry wolves waiting for the kill. They probably thought I was pulling out a pen, ready to scribble my agreement on a cocktail napkin. Instead, my fingers closed around a thick, sealed, legal-sized envelope. I pulled it out and placed it on the table between us. The crisp, heavy paper made a dry, definitive thwack as it hit the dark wood. It was the only sound in a suddenly silent world. It sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. Trevor frowned, looking at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" he asked, his voice suddenly wary. Deirdre's smug smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure confusion. I looked him directly in the eye, holding his gaze until he flinched. "Before we talk about division, Trevor," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, all traces of sadness gone, replaced by something cold and hard as steel. "I need to clarify something very important. Something you both seem to have forgotten." Music swells slightly, then fades to a subtle, thoughtful underscore. Thank you so much for clicking and listening to my story. It really means a lot to me to share this. I'm curious, where in the world are you all watching from? It would be amazing to know. Let me know in the comments below, I'd love to see. To understand how we got to that table, how I ended up sitting across from my husband and my pregnant sister, holding a legal document that would destroy them. I have to take you back 3 weeks. To a day that was supposed to be the best of my life. It all started on a crisp Thursday in March. I remember the sun was streaming through my office window, and for the first time in months, I actually felt it. I had just come out of a marathon 8-hour meeting with the entire executive board. My back ached, my throat was dry, but I was floating. After 4 long, grueling years of working 60-hour weeks, of sacrificing weekends and holidays, of living on airplanes and in stale hotel rooms as a project manager, they had finally given me the news. The CEO, a man I respected immensely, had stood up, shook my hand, and said, "Congratulations, Carolyn. You are our new commercial director." It was everything I had worked for. The title, the responsibility, the corner office with the view of the Austin skyline. I couldn't stop smiling all day, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a pat on the head, this was a 40% salary increase, plus performance bonuses that could double my income in a good year. This was life-changing. This was our new life. The first people I called, my voice bubbling with excitement, were my husband, Trevor, and my younger sister, Deirdre. They were my world, the two people I wanted to share this victory with more than anyone. "We are celebrating tonight," I announced into the phone, practically bouncing in my desk chair. "The Gilded Steer, my treat. Order anything you want. Get the $1,000 steak, I don't care." The Gilded Steer was that classic, upscale steakhouse downtown. The kind of place with dark wood paneling, deep leather booths, and waiters in starched white coats. It was the kind of place where a single steak costs more than a week's worth of groceries, a symbol of a world I had fought tooth and nail to enter. But tonight, I could afford it. Tonight, I had earned it. I arrived at the restaurant first, at 7 on the dot. I was vibrating with anticipation. I was wearing a brand new navy blue dress, a silk sheath that Trevor always said made my eyes pop. I'd bought it 3 months ago, specifically for an occasion like this, just in case I finally got the promotion. I'd hidden it in the back of my closet. I chose a quiet corner booth, a secluded little nook where we could have some privacy for our celebration. The dining room was buzzing with the low, confident hum of conversation from executives closing deals and elegant couples on expensive dates. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged in that room. Then, at 7:15, I saw them arrive. And a little knot of unease tightened in my stomach. They walked in together. Deirdre was absolutely radiant. She was beaming with a brilliant, almost manic smile I hadn't seen on her face in a long, long time. She was wearing a new dress, one I'd never seen. And Trevor. Trevor just looked nervous. He was a car salesman at a Lincoln dealership. He was charming and good-looking, but he always got a bit uncomfortable in places like this, fidgeting with his tie as if it were choking him. He had this air of, well, I loved him, but he always seemed a little out of his league in my professional world. But there was something different about him that night. A tension in his shoulders, a darting look in his eyes that I couldn't quite name. "Congratulations on the promotion, Care." Deirdre enveloped me in a hug, her arms squeezing me with a strange, almost desperate enthusiasm. She was never the demonstrative type, especially not with me. Her hugs were usually limp, one-armed affairs. This one felt rehearsed. Still, I pushed the feeling down, determined to let nothing spoil my perfect night. I was eager to share my happiness with the two people I loved most. We settled into the booth, the rich smell of aged beef and old money hanging in the air. We ordered a bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, a $200 bottle I'd been wanting to try for ages. As the waiter poured the deep red liquid into our glasses, I launched into my news, my words tumbling out in a rush of pure joy. "You won't believe the portfolio they're giving me," I began, my eyes shining. "I'll be handling the entire European expansion. It's a 40% salary increase, and that's not even counting the performance bonuses. We can finally start really looking at houses, Trevor. A real house with a backyard. The kind of place in Westlake we dreamed about." I looked at him, expecting to see his handsome face break into a wide grin. But he just stared down at his glass, swirling the wine, his expression completely unreadable. Not a flicker of joy. Not even a "congratulations, honey." I turned to Deirdre, trying to recapture the excitement. "And Deirdre," I said, my voice warm, "I was thinking, with the extra money, I could finally help you with a real down payment on a little studio of your own. Get you out of that cramped apartment and into a place you deserve. As I talked, painting this beautiful picture of our future, a future I thought we would all share, I started to notice how strange their silence was. Deirdre was listening with an unnerving intensity, her eyes wide, hanging on my every single word about my new salary. It wasn't pride I saw in her eyes. It was something else, something sharp and hungry. Calculation. Trevor, on the other hand, couldn't sit still. He just kept folding and unfolding his heavy linen napkin, his knuckles white with tension. He hadn't said more than 2 words since they'd sat down. The festive atmosphere I had imagined was curdling into something heavy and suffocating. Actually, Deirdre interrupted me, her voice cutting through my excited rambling like a shard of ice. We have some news to share, too. She reached across the heavy oak table, her movements slow and deliberate, and took Trevor's hand. My stomach didn't just drop. It plummeted. It felt like the floor had just fallen out from under me, sending me into a cold, dark freefall. The cheerful buzz of the restaurant suddenly faded into a distant, muffled roar, like I was underwater. The warm, golden lights of the chandelier above us seemed to flicker and dim. I couldn't take my eyes off her hand, her perfectly manicured fingers lacing through my husband's. A gesture of ownership, of intimacy that felt like a physical blow. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice clear and steady, laced with a note of pure, unadulterated triumph. The world stopped. Literally. It was a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at their linked hands on the dark wood of the table. Pregnant. My sister, Deirdre, was pregnant. I know this is a complicated situation, Trevor finally spoke, his voice raspy, barely a whisper. He still couldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on a spot on the tablecloth. But, it just happened, Carolyn. We fell in love. Fell. Like it was an accident. Like they'd tripped over a crack in the sidewalk and landed in each other's arms. They both watched me then, their faces a bizarre mixture of nervous expectation and a poorly disguised, smug satisfaction. It was as if they were waiting for the explosion. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to throw a drink in his face, to make a scene that would give the other tables something juicy to whisper about over their creme brulee. They wanted a drama, and I was meant to be the hysterical star. But I couldn't do anything but stare. My sister, my little sister, the one I had helped pay for college when our parents couldn't swing it, was sitting there holding my husband's hand, pregnant with his child. And they had chosen to tell me this here. Tonight. On the night of my greatest professional achievement. It wasn't a confession. It was a calculated, cruel execution. My voice came out strangely calm, a stranger's voice, devoid of any emotion. How long? Deirdre's smile was victorious as she placed her free hand over her still flat stomach. 3 months, she replied. It started right after your birthday last year. My birthday. The day I hosted a party. The day I toasted to my wonderful husband and my amazing sister. 3 months of whispered phone calls, of secret meetings, of them laughing behind my back while I worked 12-hour days to get this promotion. This promotion I was so desperate to share with the very people who were gleefully destroying my life. I don't remember paying the bill. I must have. I remember my hands fumbling with my wallet, my corporate card. I remember the waiter's pitying look. He knew. Everyone in that section of the restaurant knew. I don't remember walking out of the restaurant. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, gripping the steering wheel, the neon city lights of Austin blurring through my unshed tears. Trevor was in the passenger seat. He had just followed me. Deirdre had, thankfully, gotten a cab. The 20-minute drive home was the longest silence of my life. It was so heavy, so absolute, it felt like I was suffocating. The only sound was the click-click-click of the turn signal. My mind, my overachieving, problem-solving brain, was a frantic projector, flashing through years of little moments, little comments, little slights that suddenly clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. Trevor working late more often in the last few months. He said the dealership was running a new sales event. "Gotta hit those end-of-quarter numbers, honey," he'd said. I'd brought him dinner once, around 8 p.m. The dealership was dark. The security guard said he'd left hours ago. When I called him, he sounded out of breath. "Oh," he panted, "went out with the guys for a beer. Didn't want to bother you." I believed him. Deirdre suddenly calling more frequently, asking about my schedule, my travel plans, under the guise of sisterly chatter. "Oh, you'll be in Chicago for 4 days? You must be exhausted." Poor Trevor, all alone. "Maybe I'll drop by with a casserole or something." I'd thought, how sweet. She's finally maturing. Them arriving at the restaurant together, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His nervousness, her manic energy. It all made a sickening kind of sense. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. They had planned this. They had waited. They had waited until I announced my new, massive salary. They waited until I was at my most successful, my most secure, so they could maximize the damage. They didn't just want each other. They wanted my life. They wanted my money. My promotion wasn't a reason to celebrate, it was their signal to strike. When we pulled into the garage of my condo building, I put the car in park and just sat there, my hands frozen on the wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. "Carolyn, say something," Trevor whispered, his voice cracking. "Please. Yell at me. Hit me. Say something." I turned my head, slowly. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I had loved, the man I had supported, the man I had built a life with. And I felt nothing. Just a vast, cold emptiness. "Get out," I said, my voice flat. "What?" "Get out of my car." "Care, come on, it's the condo." "Where am I supposed to go?" "It's after midnight." "I don't care," I said, hitting the button to unlock the doors. "Go to Deirdre's. Go to hell. Just get out." He stared at me, shocked. He expected tears. He expected hysteria. He did not expect this. He got out of the car, and I floored it, the tires squealing as I drove out of the garage, leaving him standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. To understand how this could happen, you have to understand my sister. You have to understand my family. Deirdre has always lived in my shadow. And now I realize, it hadn't just bothered her, it had consumed her. It had festered into a corrosive envy that had poisoned everything between us. I was the older daughter, the responsible one. The fixer. It started when I was 16. Our dad, a CPA, lost his biggest client and his practice nearly went under. He was a proud man, but I saw the panic in his eyes, the way he'd sit at the kitchen table with stacks of bills, his head in his hands. So, I got a job. I started working at a local diner, 30 hours a week, on top of my AP classes. My paycheck went straight to the household account to help with the mortgage. I became a little adult overnight. And Deirdre? Deirdre, who was 14, complained that she couldn't get the new designer jeans all her friends had. She threw a full-on tantrum when my mom said no. My parents just sighed and told her to be understanding, but they never made her get a job. They shielded her. I was the provider, she was the princess. I was the one who got good grades without seeming to try, because I had to. I knew my only way out, my only way to build a life, was a scholarship. I couldn't afford to be average. Deirdre was the one who got B's and C's, and my parents praised her for trying her best. I remember my senior year of high school. I was a finalist for that massive, full-ride scholarship to the University of Texas. The one that would change my life. The final step was a long, deeply personal essay. I had spent weeks on it, polishing every word. It was sitting on the kitchen table, printed and perfect, in a folder, ready to be mailed. Deirdre, in a fit of clumsiness, spilled an entire can of root beer all over it. "Oops," she'd chirped, with those big, innocent eyes, as the sticky brown liquid soaked through the pages. My hand just slipped. My parents, bless their hearts, yelled at me for leaving something so important just lying around. Deirdre got a sympathetic pat on the head and a "don't worry about it, honey." I had to stay up all night, rewriting the entire thing from scratch in 6 hours, my hands shaking from caffeine and rage. I got the scholarship, but I see it now. It was never an accident. She couldn't stand to see me win. She has always been a saboteur. When I graduated with honors and landed my first great internship at a multinational firm, her comment was a backhanded, "You've always known how to sell yourself." It wasn't a compliment, it was an accusation. Our parents, they only made it worse. They were the original enablers, always trying to even things out in a way that just fueled her toxic sense of entitlement. When I bought my first reliable, new Ford Fusion with my first big bonus, I was so proud. A week later, my parents co-signed a loan for Deirdre for a 10-year-old used convertible, just so she wouldn't feel left out. The car broke down 6 months later, and they expected me to help pay for the repairs. "You're doing so well, Carolyn," my mom said. "It's just a few $100s." When it came to college, I paid my own way with scholarships and work study. They took out a second mortgage to help pay for Deirdre's private arts college, which she dropped out of after 2 semesters because the critiques were too harsh and she didn't feel inspired. Now, her constant, probing questions about my finances over the past year made a sickening kind of sense. "So, what's the interest rate on a mortgage like this?" she'd ask when she visited my condo. "What's your salary now, anyway?" "I'm just trying to get a benchmark for the freelance market," she'd lie, as if her sporadic graphic design gigs were in the same universe as my corporate career. She wasn't curious. She was doing reconnaissance. She wasn't just my little sister, she was a corporate spy, casing the joint. It was pure, unadulterated greed. And I had been too blind, too trusting, too desperate for a sisterly bond that never really existed, to see it. And Trevor. Oh, poor, simple, easily led Trevor. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just the tool. He was the weak link Deirdre could exploit to get to what she really wanted, my life. When I met him, he was all charm and that $1,000,000 smile. A car salesman who could make anyone feel like a king. He was funny, he was attentive, and he seemed to adore me. I was 24, climbing the ladder, and he was my handsome, charming escape from the corporate grind. But underneath it, he was always insecure. You see, before he worked at the Lincoln dealership, Trevor had tried to be a real estate investor. He had big dreams, fed by late-night seminars, but absolutely zero discipline. He tried to flip a house in a bad neighborhood, thinking he was smarter than the market. He'd used high-interest credit cards to pay for contractors who ran off with the money. He hid it from me for 6 months while we were dating. It wasn't until we started talking about moving in together, about maybe getting a mortgage, that the truth came out. We were at my tiny apartment, the one I could barely afford, and he just broke down. He confessed. He was nearly $30,000 in credit card debt, and his credit was shot. He couldn't even get approved for a new phone, let alone a mortgage. And guess who bailed him out? Guess who quietly took her entire year-end bonus, money she had earmarked for her own retirement fund, and paid off his debts so we could get a fresh start? Me. I told myself it was an investment in us. I told myself he just needed a second chance, that he had learned his lesson. But he never forgave me for it. He never forgave me for being the one who had to save him. He loved the idea of my success. He loved the nice dinners, the validation it gave him, the impressive friends I had. But he hated that it was my success, not his. My world was one of executive boards and international portfolios, his was one of sales quotas and commissions. He'd make little digs, jokes that always had a sting. Must be nice to just sit in meetings all day while I'm grinding on the sales floor, he'd say, conveniently forgetting that my sitting paid for our vacations, our car payments, and the roof over our heads. My new promotion, my new 40% salary increase. I see it now. For him, it wasn't a victory for our family. It was a giant, glaring spotlight on his own failure. It was a mirror reflecting everything he wasn't. He needed to feel superior. He needed to feel powerful. And Deirdre saw that weakness from a mile away. I remember the very first night I introduced them. We were at a backyard barbecue at my boss's house. I was so excited for my two favorite people to meet. Deirdre, wearing shorts that were a little too short, immediately latched onto him. She was laughing too loud at his jokes, touching his arm, flipping her hair. "Oh my God, Trevor," she gushed, "you're hilarious. Carolyn is so lucky. She's so serious all the time, it's good she has you to lighten her up." It was a perfect triangle of sabotage. A dig at me, flattery for him. Later that night, she pulled me aside by the pool. "Wow, Care," she'd said. "He's gorgeous. But, are you sure he's your type? He seems a little simple. I just worry he'll try to take advantage of you. You're so successful." I thought she was being a protective sister. How stupid I was. She wasn't warning me. She was probing. She was measuring him. She was assessing his weakness and my blindness. She didn't find him attractive, she found him useful. She stroked his ego. She listened to him complain about me. She made him feel like the man, the one in charge, the one she looked up to. She validated his insecurities, and in doing so, she owned him. He wasn't her partner, he was her crowbar. I can see it so clearly now. It wasn't some whirlwind romance, some passionate affair that just happened. It was a slow, creeping poison. A mutiny. A conspiracy. It started with texts. I was on that business trip to Chicago, the one that cemented my promotion. I was in back-to-back meetings for 4 days, working 14-hour days, collapsing into my hotel bed at midnight, and calling Trevor just to hear his voice before I passed out. He'd sound distracted. "Yeah, honey, it's fine. Just watching the game. Love you, bye." He wasn't just watching the game. Deirdre dropped by the house. "Just checking in on my favorite brother-in-law," she probably said, all bright and innocent. "I brought over that casserole you love. I know Carolyn never has time to cook." Another dig at me. Another stroke for his ego. "Carolyn works so hard, she must be exhausted. You must get so lonely." She brought over a 6-pack of his favorite beer. The beer I always kept stocked in the fridge. They sat on my patio, in the chairs I bought. And they talked. They formed a secret club. The We're Not As Perfect As Carolyn Club. They bonded over their shared victimhood. He'd complain that I was too focused on work, that I was more excited by a spreadsheet than by him, that I was too tired when I got home. And Deirdre would listen, her eyes wide with fake sympathy. "I know," she'd whisper, probably putting her hand on his arm. "She's always been like that. She doesn't get us, Trevor. We're different. We're the dreamers. She's just a planner. She's so cold sometimes, isn't she?" It was them against me. I remember coming home from that marathon meeting, the final presentation. I was exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline. Trevor was on the couch, smiling down at his phone. That secret, smug smile. "Who are you texting?" I asked, kissing his head. Just Deirdre, he said, not looking up. She's hilarious. Sent me a funny meme about work. I actually felt a pang of happiness. I'm so glad you two are getting along, I said. It means the world to me that my two favorite people are friends. God, I was a fool. I wasn't just blind, I was leading him to her. I was endorsing it. It escalated. A secret coffee, just to complain about Carolyn. A sympathetic hug in my kitchen that lasted just a little too long while I was stuck in traffic. And then, the line was crossed. In my house. While I was at work, securing the very salary they were planning to steal. And they kept crossing it. For 3 months. They'd sit at my table, drink my wine, and plan my destruction. Deirdre saw her lottery ticket. She saw my new salary, my condo, my investments, my 401k. And Trevor, he saw a way to finally feel powerful. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was getting back at me. He was taking what he felt he was owed for the humiliation of being the less successful partner, for the humiliation of me paying off his debts. They weren't star-crossed lovers. They were co-conspirators in a financial crime. And I was the mark. The pregnancy? I suddenly realized that wasn't an accident either. That was the plan. That was her insurance policy. That was the leverage they thought would break me, force my hand, and make me give them everything. A baby. A weapon. After leaving Trevor in the garage, I drove for an hour. I didn't cry. I was just empty. The adrenaline from the dinner had worn off, leaving a profound, hollow numbness. I finally pulled into a quiet, dark park and just sat there, the engine off, staring into the void. I was a commercial director. I was responsible for millions of dollars in revenue. I could predict market trends. I could negotiate multi-year contracts. And I hadn't been able to see the two-person insurgency happening in my own home. When I finally got back to my condo, it was almost 2 a.m. I walked in, and it was just silent. He hadn't come back. I checked my phone, which had been on silent. 17 missed calls. All from my mother. And one new text message. It was from Trevor. A coward's message. I'm at Deirdre's. We'll talk tomorrow. Deirdre's. Not your sister's house. Deirdre's. He called her place like it was his home now. A familiar destination. As if our 4 years of marriage were just an inconvenient detour on his way to her. As if I was the obstacle that had finally been removed. I spent the rest of the night awake, pacing the 1,200 square feet of the condo I'd bought with my own money. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sun come up. When the sun finally began to stream through the blinds, I was still sitting on the couch, my beautiful dress wrinkled, my makeup a wreck. My phone started ringing again. My mother. This time, I answered. Carolyn, thank God, she burst out, her voice a mixture of panic and annoyance. I've been calling all night. Deirdre told me what happened. I waited. I couldn't speak. Honey, she began, and her voice took on that wheedling, placating tone she always used when she was about to ask me to do something for Deirdre. These things, they're complicated. Love is a funny thing. People make mistakes. Mistakes? I finally whispered, my voice hoarse. Mom, he's my husband. I know, honey, I know. But Deirdre is so upset. She's hysterical. She says you were so cold to her. You know how sensitive she is. I felt the blood drain from my face. She's upset? She's upset? Mom, did you hear what I said? Carolyn, please, she said, her voice hardening. This is tearing your father apart. We have to be practical now. This isn't just about you and Trevor anymore. This isn't just about your hurt feelings. Now there's a baby to think about. You're the strong one, Carolyn. You've always been the strong one. You have to be the bigger person. A baby. They were already using an unborn child as a human shield. The betrayal wasn't just from Trevor and Deirdre. It was from my own mother. She wasn't calling to see if I was okay. She was calling to manage me. To protect Deirdre. To make sure I didn't upset the new happy family. Mom, I said, my voice suddenly clear and cold. Did you, or did you not, just ask me to be the bigger person about my sister having an affair with my husband? I'm just saying, there's a baby involved. I have to go, Mom. Carolyn, don't you dare hang up on me. Your father and I cut her off. I can't talk about this right now. I hung up the phone. I stood there in the silent, sun-drenched living room. And I realized I was truly, completely, devastatingly alone. The numbness was gone. And in its place was a cold, hard clarity. If I was the strong one, then I would be. He showed up that evening. Around 6. He didn't knock. He used his key. The sound of his key in my lock, after what he had done, felt like a physical violation. The audacity of him, letting himself into my home, the home he had betrayed, was staggering. He walked in with an empty suitcase. He looked tired, but also relieved. He tried to explain himself while he packed, stuffing shirts into his bag, not even looking at me. He was spewing the kind of empty clichés you hear in bad movies. It wasn't planned, Carolyn. It just happened. As if betrayal were a sudden weather event, an act of God beyond his control. Then, he tried to blame me. He really did. Deirdre, she was going through a tough time, he mumbled, tossing socks into the bag. She needed someone to talk to. You've just been so busy with this promotion, Care. You've been distant. She listened to me. And I was, what? I finally said, my voice quiet. Just your bank? The woman who paid off your $30,000 in debt? He flinched. He hated when I mentioned that. That's not fair, he snapped. Fair? I said. You want to talk about fair? He zipped the bag, and the sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. The numbness was receding, replaced by a slow-burning, icy rage. My voice was flat. Final. I'm going to find a lawyer. He stopped. He finally looked at me, and I saw that flicker of genuine panic in his eyes. The reality of consequences was beginning to dawn on him. Whoa, Carolyn, hey, he said quickly, putting on his reasonable salesman voice. The one he used to close a deal. It doesn't have to be like this. We can be civil. We can be adults. I just stared at him. Look, he said, stepping towards me, hands slightly raised as if to calm a wild animal. We can divide things fairly. No need to get lawyers involved and make it messy. It's just stuff. Fairly? The word hung in the air, a monument to his delusion. Yeah. You know. He was gaining confidence now, as if he and Deirdre had rehearsed this. This was their plan all along. We sell the condo, split it 50/50ths. The investments, too. We liquidate everything, divide it up. Simple. It's the only fair way. After all, we're married. Community property. My blood ran cold. He didn't just want out. He didn't just want my sister. He wanted to be paid for his betrayal. He wanted to take half of everything I had ever worked for, half of my new, massive salary, and start his new life with Deirdre. He saw my silence as weakness. He saw it as agreement. He even had the nerve to pat my shoulder. We can just get a mediator, he pressed on. It'll be cheaper than a divorce lawyer. We'll just settle. It's better for everyone. Especially with the baby coming. I looked at this man, this weak, pathetic, parasitic man who was standing in my home, smelling like my sister's perfume, and I felt nothing. No love, no sadness. Just contempt. Get out, I said. Carolyn, just be reasonable. Get out. Now. And leave your key on the table. He finally saw something in my eyes that scared him. The negotiator was gone. He fumbled for his keychain, slid the key off, and dropped it on the granite counter. It made a small, pathetic clink. He grabbed his suitcase and left. The second that door clicked shut, I let out the breath I didn't know I was holding. It wasn't a sob. It was a release. I walked to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. And the chain. The second his car pulled out of the garage, I was on the phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call a therapist. I called my best friend from college, Elaine. Elaine is not the friend who brings you ice cream and tells you you're pretty. Elaine is the friend who brings you a shovel and an alibi. She's a shark. A brilliant, terrifying, take-no-prisoners family law lawyer in Houston. She was the valedictorian of our law school, and she ate men like Trevor for breakfast. She picked up on the second ring. Carolyn? It's 7 p.m. What's wrong? I told her everything. My voice was steady, robotic. I was a project manager relaying facts. The dinner. The promotion. The pregnancy. It just happened. And finally, Trevor's reasonable offer, let's split it 50-50 and not get lawyers involved. She was silent for a full 10 seconds. I could just hear her breathing, a slow, steady inhale and exhale. Then, she said, okay, Carolyn. First, I am so sorry this happened. He's trash. Your sister is trash. They are human garbage. We will mourn later. Right now, we need to move past the emotion and get practical. Her voice was a jolt of pure, cold electricity. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was exactly what I needed. He wants 50-50, she scoffed, and I could hear the sound of her typing, the sharp, angry clicks of the keys. That's adorable. We're not giving him 50-50. We're not giving him 5. We're going to give him nothing. I need you to gather every single financial document you have. Bank statements, deeds, tax returns, investment portfolios. Everything. He said he doesn't want to get lawyers involved, I whispered, the absurdity of it hitting me. Elaine let out a sharp laugh. Of course he doesn't. People with no assets never want to get lawyers involved. People who are about to commit grand larceny hate getting the police involved. Carolyn, listen to me. You fought for what you have. You built your career from scratch while he was failing at real estate and selling cars. You paid off his debt. You are not going to just hand over half of your life's work to the man who betrayed you with your own sister. Okay, I said, my voice stronger. Okay. What do I do first? You go to your home office, she commanded, and you pull out every piece of paper that has your name on it. Your mortgage documents, your car title, your 401k, and, Carolyn? Yeah? Do you remember that thing I made you do before you got married? The just-in-case thing? The thing you said was unromantic and paranoid? My breath caught. I'd completely forgotten. I had buried it so deep. I think so, I whispered. Find it, Elaine said, her voice like steel. Find it now. And then call me back. I hung up. I was no longer a grieving wife. I was a client. I was a corporation of one, and I was under attack. I walked into my home office, the one I'd meticulously set up, the one I'd paid for, and I started pulling out my color-coded folders. My problem-solving brain, the one that just got me a massive promotion, finally, clicked on. The tears were gone. The numbness was gone. It was time to work. I hung up with Elaine. My heart was a drum, beating a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. That paranoid thing. I was no longer a grieving wife. I was a client. I was a corporation of one, and I was under attack. I walked into my home office, the one I'd meticulously set up, the one I'd paid for. This room was my sanctuary, all clean lines and organized files. My problem-solving brain, the one that just got me a massive promotion, finally, clicked on. The tears were gone. The numbness was gone. It was time to work. I started pulling out my color-coded folders. Green for household, blue for auto, red for financial. I was a project manager to my core, my life was categorized. I pulled out the green folder labeled marriage documents. I pulled out our birth certificates, and then the official, embossed marriage certificate from Travis County. My eyes scanned the familiar document, but then they snagged on something I hadn't noticed or thought about in 4 years. A small typed line at the bottom, just above the official seal, subject to the terms of the separate property agreement filed on this date. Separate property. The words echoed in my mind. Why did that sound so familiar? And then it hit me. Elaine's voice from 4 years ago, sharp and clear in my memory. I don't care how in love you are. You're the one with the assets. We're doing this. Oh my God, I whispered to the empty room. The prenup. We had a prenuptial agreement. I scrambled out of the office and ran to my bedroom closet. In the back, behind my winter coats, bolted to the floor, was a small, fireproof safe. It had been so long since I'd opened it that I fumbled with the combination, my fingers suddenly clumsy and slick with sweat. My birthday, backward. Click. The heavy little door swung open with a pneumatic hiss. The air inside smelled of old paper and metal. It held my passport, the deed to the condo, and my grandmother's pearls. And nestled between them was a thick, sealed, legal-sized envelope from the Travis County Clerk's office. My hands were shaking so hard I almost ripped the clasp. I tore it open. The hope was so intense it was painful. Maybe, just maybe, my younger, more cautious self had just saved me from my current nightmare. The title, in bold, all-caps letters, stared up at me. Prenuptial Agreement. Between Carolyn D. Wheeler and Trevor M. Cole. I sank down onto the carpet of my closet, the heavy legal paper clutched in my hands, and I started to read. As I held that envelope, the memory came rushing back. The memory of why I had agreed to Elaine's paranoid suggestion. It wasn't just Elaine being a good lawyer. It was because I had been burned before. Badly. His name was Mark. My college boyfriend. He was my first real love. He was charming, ambitious, and, as it turned out, a pathological liar. He seemed so wonderful, so supportive of my studies. He told me he was managing his family trust fund and was starting his own business. Then, 6 months into our relationship, I got a call from a collections agency. And then another. And another. It turned out Mark's family trust fund was a fantasy. He'd been unemployed for months. He had stolen my social security number from my financial aid paperwork, opened 3 credit cards in my name, and maxed them all out. To the tune of $5,000. I was 20 years old, a full-time student, and I was $5,000 in debt. The humiliation was worse than the money. The feeling of being so stupid, so trusting, so used. I confronted him, and he didn't even apologize. He told me I was lucky to have good credit and that I should be supportive of his dreams. I kicked him out, of course. But the debt was in my name. It took me a full year to pay it all off. I worked 2 jobs on top of my full class schedule. I was a waitress at a diner from 5 to midnight, and I worked weekends at the campus library. I lived on ramen noodles and free coffee from the break room. I remember calling my mom, crying, explaining what had happened. And she just sighed and said, "Well, Carolyn, you've always been too trusting. You need to be more careful." No sympathy. Just blame. I swore to myself, in that tiny, cold dorm room, that I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. Never. I would never let a man compromise my financial future. I would never let my trust be a weapon someone could use against me. So, when I met Trevor, I was cautious. And when I paid off his $30,000 debt, I felt that old, familiar sickness in my stomach. I loved him, I really did. But that $5,000 lesson from Mark was screaming in the back of my head. So when Elaine, my sharp, brilliant lawyer friend, suggested a prenup, I didn't fight her. I didn't tell Trevor it was because of Mark. I just told him it was good, sensible financial planning, as my lawyer, Mrs. Albright, had suggested. I told him it was just a piece of paper. I remembered the day we signed it with photographic clarity. It was a miserable, humid Thursday morning in May, just 2 weeks before our wedding. Trevor showed up 15 minutes late to the lawyer's office. He was miserably hungover. He'd been out with his work buddies from the dealership for a last bachelor outing and had stumbled in at 3 a.m. the night before, reeking of stale beer and cheap wings. He showed up to the lawyer's office looking sleepy and irritable, in a crumpled shirt, complaining under his breath that he'd lost an important sale because of this stupid appointment. He was more focused on his lost commission than on the document that would define our financial future. We sat in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Mrs. Albright, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who did not suffer fools. She peered at Trevor over her glasses, clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice crisp, "I want to be very clear about what you are signing." She explained the basic terms with the patience of a saint, in plain English. "This is a complete separation of assets," she said, her gaze fixed mainly on Trevor, trying to gauge his comprehension. "This means each of you maintains ownership of your individual property. Both what you bring into the marriage, and, crucially, what you acquire during it through your own salary, inheritance, or investments. This agreement protects both of you. Do you understand?" Yeah, got it," Trevor said, nodding distractedly. "What's mine is mine. What's hers is hers, right? Makes sense." He was already pulling out his phone, sneaking a look at his texts under the conference table. Mrs. Albright's lips thinned. "It also includes, Mr. Cole, and this is very important, a mutual waiver of spousal support. This means that in the event of a divorce, neither of you can ask the other for alimony. Do you understand that?" "Alimony?" He actually scoffed. "Isn't that for celebrities?" "We're not celebrities, are we, babe?" "Yeah, whatever. That's fine. I'm never going to need that." He was trying to be charming, to win over Mrs. Albright. She was not charmed. "And you understand," she pressed on, "that Mrs. Wheeler, Carolyn, is entering this marriage with significant assets? The condo, her investment portfolio? And her career has a much higher earning potential than yours?" I remember kicking him under the table, embarrassed. But he just laughed. "Yeah, I know, I'm marrying a big shot," he said, winking at me. "It's fine. What's hers is hers. I'm not after her money. I love her." He was so arrogant. So dismissive. He truly believed this was all rich people nonsense, a meaningless formality. He signed every page, all 15 pages of dense, single-spaced legal text, with the casual, hurried air of someone signing a delivery receipt. He didn't read a single word. He just wanted to get it over with so he could get back to the dealership and try to save his sale. Driving back to my condo in my car, he put his hand on my knee and smiled, his eyes still bloodshot. "I still think this whole contract thing is kind of weird," he'd said. "But if it makes you happy, that's all that matters. In 2 weeks, we'll be husband and wife. Forever." He truly hadn't understood a thing. He hadn't absorbed a single word. He had no idea that in his hungover, distracted state, he had just signed away any right to my present and my future fortune. And I, so blissfully in love and confident in our forever, didn't mind his lack of attention. The contract was just a formality we'd never, ever need. How tragically, beautifully wrong I was. Now, for years later, standing in the harsh light of my bedroom at 2 a.m, I finally understood the profound value of that rich people nonsense. I spread the pages of the contract out on my bed. The legal words that once seemed like dry, formal jargon now shone on the page like a sacred text, a declaration of my independence. I read each clause again, my heart pounding with a wild, triumphant rhythm. Clause 1, complete separation of property. Each spouse shall maintain individual ownership of all property owned prior to the marriage, and, crucially, all property acquired during the marriage through individual effort, salary, inheritance, or investment. My breath caught in my throat. During the marriage. That single phrase was my shield, my fortress. The condo I had bought before we were even married? Mine. The substantial investment portfolio I funded every single month from my own salary? Mine. The valuable stock options I received from my company as part of my compensation? Mine. The $50,000 stake in the tech startup I had bought 2 years ago with my bonus money? All of it. It was exclusively, unequivocally, and legally mine. I moved on to the next section, my eyes flying across the page. Clause 2, dissolution of marriage. In the event of dissolution of marriage, there shall be no division of separate property. Each party shall retain the entirety of their individual assets and waive any and all claims to the assets of the other party. No division of property. He had no right to anything. Absolutely nothing. It was so clear, so absolute. I kept reading, my hands no longer trembling but steady, searching for a loophole, some obscure clause he could use against me. But there was none. Mrs. Albright had drafted an ironclad, impenetrable fortress around my life's work. And then I saw it. The final, beautiful, glorious nail in the coffin of their greedy little plan. Clause 3, spousal support waiver. In consideration of the mutual waivers herein, both parties hereby knowingly and voluntarily waive any and all rights to spousal support, alimony, or maintenance from the other party, both temporary and permanent, in the event of a separation or divorce. Alimony. He had no right to ask me for a single penny of alimony. Considering the vast difference in our incomes, especially with my new promotion, he would have been the one legally entitled to ask for significant financial support after the divorce. But he had signed that right away. He had traded it for another 30 minutes to get back to the dealership. For the first time in 3 agonizing days, a real, genuine smile spread across my face. It felt foreign, but wonderful. Trevor had signed his own financial death warrant 4 years ago, and he didn't even have the slightest clue. And Deirdre. Oh, sweet, conniving Deirdre. My mind flashed to her triumphant, smug smile at the restaurant. She had seduced my husband, thinking he was her lottery ticket, her golden goose, her gateway to a comfortable life funded by my sweat and sacrifice. She thought she was about to cash in on half of my assets, a prize she believed she was owed. What a delicious, spectacular, and deeply satisfying irony. She had just shackled herself to a man who was, legally speaking, worth less than nothing. I didn't just smile. I got to work. I went back to my home office. I grabbed my laptop. I opened a new Excel sheet. I titled the file, divorce_financials.xlsx. My mind was suddenly sharp and clear. I was no longer a victim, I was a project manager, and this was my most important project. I started making a detailed list of my current net worth. Column A, assets, Carolyn. Row 1, condo, Zillow estimate. Column B, $400,000. Row 2, Vanguard portfolio, VTSAX. Column B, $105,000. Row 3, company stock options, vested. Column B, $120,000. Row 4, tech startup stake, seed. Column B, $50,000. Row 5, 401k, fidelity. Column B, $130,000. Row 6, liquid savings, Chase. Column B, $40,000. Row 7, 2020 Lexus, paid off. Column B, $20,000. I hid some at the bottom. Total, $865,000. Then I made a new section. Income, Carolyn. Row 1, new salary, annual. Column B, $220,000. Row 2, potential bonus. Column B, up to $100,000. Then I created a new tab. Assets, Trevor. Row 1, 2018 Ford F-150, KBB. Column B, $20,000. Row 2, outstanding auto loan. Column B, minus $15,000. Row 3, credit card debt that I know about. Column B, minus $5,000. Row 4, total. Column B, $0. Income, Trevor. Row 1, salary, annual, estimated. Column B, $55,000. My God. The sheer, staggering imbalance. Deirdre didn't fall in love with my husband. She fell in love with my Excel spreadsheet. And they had both made a fatal, ruinous miscalculation. They had no idea about the armor of ink I had wrapped around my life all those years ago. I took out my phone. I went into my closet. I spread the prenup out on the floor, page by page. I turned on the bright overhead light. I took clear, high-resolution photos of every single page. Page 1, page 2. Page 14. Page 15, with his careless, looping signature right next to my neat, precise one. I attached all 15 images to a new email. To thelaine.sloan@sloanlaw.com. Subject, found. I wrote one sentence in the body of the email: Elaine, you magnificent woman. Call me when you wake up. I hit send. It was 3:45 a.m. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I sat on my couch, watching the pre-dawn light of Austin begin to purple the sky. I wasn't shaking anymore. At 4:02 a.m., my phone buzzed. A new email. From Elaine. Her reply was short and sweet. Meredith. This is a work of legal art. Mrs. Albright was a goddess. They have no grounds. He gets nothing. Not the condo, not the investments, not a penny of alimony. He is, to use the legal term, completely and totally screwed. Go to sleep. We'll start the paperwork tomorrow. They have no idea what's about to hit them. I read the email 3 times. Then I went to my bedroom, got out of my rumpled dress, and for the first time in 3 days, I slept. The next 3 weeks were their own special kind of hell. But it was a hell I could navigate, because I had a secret. I had a shield. My mother called. Every single day. She and my father had become Deirdre's official flying monkeys. Carolyn, you're not answering our calls. This is childish. Carolyn, Deirdre is so stressed, it's not good for the baby. You need to be the bigger person. Carolyn, your father and I are just so disappointed in you. Your sister needs you, and you're being selfish. Carolyn, Trevor called. He said you won't talk to him about a mediator. You're just trying to run up lawyer fees to punish them. That's not who you are. With every call, the ice around my heart got a little thicker. I'm not ready to talk, Mom, I'd say, and hang up. I let them stew. I let them get impatient. I let them get anxious about the money. I knew, with Deirdre's spending habits, that whatever money she had was dwindling fast. I knew Trevor's commissions were variable. They needed my money. They needed that 50-50th split to start their new life. While they were panicking, I was working. I met with Elaine. We filed the divorce petition. We were quiet. We were strategic. In the 4th week, when I knew they would be at their breaking point, I finally made the call. I didn't call Trevor. He was just the pawn. I called the queen. I called Deirdre. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. Carolyn? I pitched my voice low, tired, and full of resignation. I channeled every ounce of acting ability I had. Deirdre, hi, I sighed. Look. I've had a lot of time to think. About everything. Oh, Carolyn. She started, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. No, let me finish, I said, cutting her off, but softly. I've had a lot of time to think. And I think you guys are right. There's no point in holding a grudge. We're adults. These things happen. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. This was not the reaction she was expecting. This was too easy. Really? She stammered. You're okay with this? I'm trying to be, I sighed, putting a little waver in my voice. I mean, you fell in love. It wasn't anyone's fault. And now there's the baby to think about. That's the most important thing, right? The baby. Yes. Yes, exactly. Her relief was so palpable I could feel it through the phone. So, I continued, I was thinking, maybe we could meet. To talk. Civilly. About how to resolve everything without a big, messy, expensive fight. Just to settle things like adults. The way Trevor wanted. Oh, Carolyn. Yes. That's so mature of you. That would be great. Trevor will be so happy. He was so worried you were going to make a scene and drag this out. No scene, I said smoothly. Let's meet at the Gilded Steer again. Really? She asked, a little surprised. Yeah, I said, letting my voice crack just a tiny bit. Since that's where it all started. We can give it a new memory. A memory of closure. That's beautiful, Carolyn. Really? Wow. Okay. When? Saturday night? 8 o'clock? Perfect, she chirped, her voice bright with victory. We'll see you then. And, thank you, Carolyn. This is the right thing to do. See you Saturday, I said, and hung up. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I looked at the original copy of the prenup, sitting in its fresh envelope on my desk. Saturday night was going to be very, very interesting. I spent Saturday preparing. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance. And I was the star, director, and producer. I chose my outfit with surgical precision. Not the navy blue dress of a victim. This time, I wore an elegant, severe black dress made of a heavy crepe fabric that didn't wrinkle. It had long sleeves and a sharp, modern neckline. It was powerful, understated, and screamed that I was in control. No jewelry, except for my simple diamond stud earrings. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, low ponytail. The message was clear, I meant business. I even practiced my expression in the mirror, a mask of calm resignation, perhaps a little sad around the eyes, but ultimately accepting. Elaine thought I was playing with fire. We had a long call the night before. Meredith, are you absolutely sure you want to do this yourself? She'd asked, her voice laced with concern. It could get ugly. He could get loud, aggressive. Let him, I told her, my voice steady. They deserve ugly. Besides, they're so busy planning how to spend my money, they'll never suspect a thing. They think I'm a broken woman coming to beg for scraps from my own table. They're in for a surprise. I arrived at the Gilded Steer on Saturday, punctually at 8 o'clock. The hostess, a different woman this time, smiled warmly. Table 4. 3, I said, my voice smooth as silk. Under Wheeler. As she led me through the dining room, I saw the maitre d', the same kind older man from that fateful night. He recognized me, and his face fell with a flicker of pity. I gave him a small, tight smile. I hope tonight is a much happier occasion for you, ma'am, he said in a low voice as I passed. I have a feeling it will be, I replied. The hostess tried to lead me to a small table in the center. Actually, I said, could we have that corner booth? The one right back there? I pointed to the scene of the crime. Of course, she said, and led me to the deep leather booth. I sat there for 10 minutes, sipping a glass of ice water, observing the room. I felt strangely calm, my heartbeat slow and steady. The anger and grief were still there, but they had been forged into something else, something sharp and focused, like a weapon. Then, at 8:15, they arrived. They walked in hand, and the entire atmosphere around them was different. They weren't nervous this time. They were relaxed, smiling, laughing together. They looked like a couple who had weathered a storm and had now come out into the sunshine, completely in love and ready to claim their prize. They were triumphant. Deirdre was wearing a soft, pink maternity dress. It was just tight enough to proudly accentuate her small but noticeable baby bump. She looked so smug. They both did. They looked like they had one. Mare, Deirdre said, leaning down to give me an air kiss next to my cheek, her perfume cloying and sweet. You look beautiful, so chic. Thank you, I said, my voice perfectly even. You both look well. The pregnancy suits you, Deirdre. It's been wonderful, she bubbled. We're already thinking of names. Trevor is set on Michael if it's a boy, but I'm leaning towards Gabriel. Trevor, playing the part of the doting future father, pulled out the chair for her, a chivalrous gesture he rarely bothered with for me in our 4 years of marriage. He sat down opposite me and gave me that look of practiced sincerity. Carolyn, he said, his voice low and serious. Thank you for agreeing to do this. For talking like this. Peacefully. I was afraid you'd, make a scene? I finished for him, giving him that small, sad smile I had perfected. Don't be silly, Trevor. We're all adults here, aren't we? We ordered the same expensive bottle of Cabernet as last time. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Trevor ordered it, a grand gesture, as if he were the host. I let him. Deirdre sadly held up a hand. None for me, obviously, she said, patting her stomach again. Just a club soda. They thought this was their victory lap. They thought this was the final negotiation, where the vanquished foe gracefully surrenders the spoils of war. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. After the waiter had poured the wine and retreated, Trevor cleared his throat, getting down to the business he was so eager to conclude. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, adopting that earnest, sincere expression he used when he was trying to close a sale on a top-of-the-line Lincoln Navigator. So, he began, exchanging a quick, confident glance with Deirdre. It was clear they had rehearsed this. About the divorce. We wanted to propose doing everything amicably. No mess, no fuss. We think the fairest way, the only fair way, is to just divide things right down the middle. I took a slow sip of my wine, watching him over the rim of the glass. I said nothing. I just nodded, encouraging him to continue. He took my silence as agreement and gained momentum. We can get the condo appraised and sell it, then split the proceeds 50-50ths. The investments, too. Your 401k, your stocks, we can just liquidate them and divide it all up. Simple. Community property, right? Deirdre chimed in, her voice sweet and reasonable. We think that's the only fair way, Carolyn. You two built a life together, after all. And now, with the baby, we just want to be able to get a fresh start. A little house of our own. For the family. And then, Trevor went for the kill. He put his hand over Deirdre's on the table. And, he said, his tone becoming a little more serious, with your new promotion and that fantastic new salary, we were thinking some temporary alimony would really help. Just until I can get stabilized with Deirdre and the baby. She won't be able to work for a while, and, well, my commissions are so up and down. It would just be for a year or two, just to help us get on our feet. Alimony. He really believed, with every fiber of his being, that I was going to pay him alimony while he started a new life with my sister, raising their child. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking nerve of it was almost impressive. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. I let them sit there, basking in the glow of their anticipated fortune. I saw the future flashing in their eyes, my condo, my money, my salary, all flowing neatly into their new life. Then, I slowly reached into my purse, my movements calm and deliberate. They both watched me, their eyes gleaming with anticipation, like two hungry wolves waiting for the kill. They probably thought I was pulling out a pen, ready to scribble my agreement on a cocktail napkin. Instead, my fingers closed around a thick, sealed, legal-sized envelope. I pulled the envelope out of my purse and placed it on the table between us. The crisp, heavy paper made a dry, definitive thwack as it hit the dark wood. It was the only sound in a suddenly silent world. It sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. Trevor frowned, looking at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" he asked, his voice suddenly wary. Deirdre's smug smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure confusion. I looked him directly in the eye, holding his gaze until he flinched. "Before we talk about division, Trevor," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, all traces of sadness gone, replaced by something cold and hard as steel. "I need to clarify something very important. Something you seem to have forgotten." "What are you talking about?" Deirdre demanded, her voice sharp. I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on Trevor. "Our prenuptial agreement, Trevor," I said. The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower wilting. He went from a healthy tan to a pasty, sickly gray in a matter of seconds. "What?" he whispered. "Remember?" I pressed on, my voice cutting. "For years ago. Mrs. Albright's office. You were hungover. You were late. You were complaining about a lost commission. You signed 15 pages without reading a single one. You called it, what was it? Rich people nonsense." Deirdre looked from me to him, her brow furrowed in utter confusion. "What agreement? Trevor? What is she talking about? You never told me about any agreement." I forgot," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. It was nothing. It was just some paper she wanted for the condo." "It wasn't nothing, Trevor," I said. I tore open the envelope and pulled the pristine pages out, spreading them on the table like a winning hand of poker so they could both see. "It was, and is, a legally binding contract. A contract that you signed. A contract that makes this conversation very, very simple." Trevor just stared at the pages, his mouth hanging open. He looked like he was going to be sick. Deirdre, on the other hand, snatched the top page. Her eyes, sharp and hungry just moments before, were now wide with dawning horror. "What is this?" she hissed at Trevor. "You signed a prenup?" "I didn't think it was real," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I thought it was just something to make her feel better." "Oh, it's real," I said. "Let's review, shall we?" I pointed to the first bolded heading. "Let's start with Clause 1, complete separation of assets." "Do you remember what that means, Trevor? Or were you too busy checking your phone that day?" His hands were visibly trembling as he picked up the pages. His eyes darted frantically across the lines, trying to process the dense legal terms he had so arrogantly and foolishly ignored 4 years ago. "Now hold on, Carolyn," Deirdre said, her voice losing its confident edge as she tried to take control of a situation that was rapidly spinning out of her grasp. "Even with some kind of agreement, you were married for 4 years. There's community property. Division of assets acquired during the marriage." "Not when there's a complete separation of assets, Deirdre," I cut her off, my voice as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. I tapped my manicured finger on the specific clause on page 2. "It's right here in black and white. Each spouse shall maintain individual ownership of all property owned prior to the marriage, and all property acquired during the marriage through individual effort, salary, inheritance, or investment." That means the condo, which I bought before we married, is mine. The investment portfolio, which is funded exclusively from my salary, is mine. The stock options, my 401k, my new salary, everything, it all stays with me. This can't be legal. Trevor finally exploded, his voice cracking and rising an octave. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware and drawing attention from the neighboring booths. "This is Texas. It's a community property state. I lived there. I contributed to the expenses." "You contributed $300 a month for groceries and gas, Trevor," I said calmly, my voice a low, steady counterpoint to his rising hysteria. "I paid the $1,800 mortgage every single month on time from my own bank account. I paid the $200 condo fees. I paid for the utilities, the internet, the insurance. Your $300 does not give you property rights over an $800,000 asset portfolio. That's not how math or the law works." Deirdre was now frantically flipping through the pages, her eyes wild, her face pale, searching desperately for a loophole, a lifeline, some escape clause from the nightmare that was unfolding before her. "But alimony," she shrieked, her voice thin and reedy. "He has a right to alimony. You make so much more than him. The judge will." "The judge," I interrupted, "will honor the contract." I gave her a slow, cold smile. It didn't reach my eyes. "An excellent point, though. Please turn to page 5, section 3. It's titled, Spousal Support Waiver. Allow me to read it for you." I picked up the page and read clearly into the shocked silence. "Both parties hereby knowingly and voluntarily waive any and all rights to spousal support, alimony, or maintenance from the other party, both temporary and permanent, in the event of a separation or divorce." Trevor waived his right to alimony when he put his neat little signature on this line right here. "I didn't know what I was signing," he yelled, his face contorted with a mixture of panic and impotent rage. "You tricked me. This is a trick." "I tricked you?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. I leaned forward, the predator cornering its prey. "Trevor, you were a 30-year-old man sitting in a lawyer's office. Mrs. Albright explained every single clause in plain English. You were too arrogant to listen. You were too lazy to read. You said, and I quote, 'Yeah, makes sense.' There are witnesses. It's all registered at the courthouse. It is as legal and as binding as the marriage vows you so casually threw away." The expression on Deirdre's face was a slow-motion car crash of emotions. It morphed from confusion to disbelief to pure, unadulterated horror. The reality of their situation, the catastrophic failure of her grand plan, was finally hitting her like a freight train. Deirdre looked at Trevor, her face pale and slack with shock. "You mean, he gets nothing?" she whispered, the words barely audible, her dream of a comfortable life dissolving into thin air. Nothing at all? Nothing, I confirmed, gathering the pristine pages and sliding them back into their envelope. Zero. Zilch. Nada. I looked at Trevor. You leave this marriage exactly as you entered it, with your financed pickup truck, your collection of polo shirts, and your own significant credit card debts. Trevor buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. He made a low, choking sound. Meredith, for God's sake, he pleaded, his voice muffled by his palms. We can talk about this. There has to be a way. You can't just leave me with nothing. I'm going to have a child to support. I leaned in again, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, so only our table could hear. No, Trevor, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy as I emphasized each word. You are going to have a child to support. Deirdre's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a fresh, new terror. Which brings me to my next point, I said, my voice almost cheerful. Child support. What? Deirdre whispered. Child support, I repeated, feigning surprise at her ignorance. The father has a legal obligation to pay child support to the mother. Here in Texas, the guideline is typically 20% of the non-custodial parent's net income for one child. I pulled up my phone and opened the calculator app, making a show of tapping in the numbers. So, let's do the math, shall we? You earn, what, Trevor? $5,000 a month, gross? On a good month? After taxes, that's about $3,800 net. 20% of that is. I tapped the equals sign. $760. I turned the phone screen so they could both see the number. $760. Every single month, Trevor. That money will be coming out of your paycheck and going directly to Deirdre. Every month. Until your child turns 18. Or graduates high school, whichever comes later. They just stared at each other in stunned, panicked silence. They were partners in crime, and they were just now realizing that one of them was going to have to pay the other for their shared transgression. For the rest of their lives. Deirdre looked at Trevor, not with love, not with adoration, but with pure, cold fury. She wasn't looking at her partner. She was looking at a broken ATM. And Trevor, he looked at her like she was a trap he had just willingly walked into. The irony was exquisite. If you are still listening to this, please help me out by liking this video and just comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you're here, that you're amazing, and that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement, truly. It cheers me on. So just comment the number 1 so I can see you, and now, listen to what happened next. Walking out of that restaurant for the second and final time was like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into the bright sunlight. I didn't look back. I didn't feel sadness or anger anymore. Just a profound, cleansing sense of liberation. I got in my car, and I didn't cry. I laughed. I laughed all the way home. The divorce was finalized in exactly 62 days. Just as Elaine predicted, Trevor didn't contest it. His lawyer, no doubt, after one look at the ironclad prenup, had probably told him he didn't have a legal leg to stand on. And with the dead weight of that toxic marriage officially and legally cut away, my life didn't just recover. It skyrocketed. It was as if all the energy I had been pouring into that failing relationship, all the effort I'd spent trying to manage Trevor's insecurities and Deirdre's jealousy, was suddenly redirected into my own life. My own ambitions. I poured everything I had into my new role as commercial director. I didn't just meet my targets, I shattered them. In my first 6 months, I secured a partnership in Germany that was the largest in the company's history. I was flying to London, to Tokyo, making deals and building a name for myself. The performance bonuses that came with that success were staggering. My monthly income in some periods soared past $20,000. That tech startup I had a stake in? It landed a new round of funding, tripling the value of my stake overnight. My net worth crossed the $1 million mark before my 30th birthday. That October, I sold the condo. The moment the sale closed, I felt a final sense of release. It was cleansing, like shedding an old skin. I sold it for a tidy profit and bought a new place. A stunning 2-story loft in a downtown high-rise with a private terrace that had a breathtaking view of Lady Bird Lake. I paid the $700,000 in cash. I then hired a top interior designer and spent another $200,000 renovating it from top to bottom, turning it into my dream home. A sleek German kitchen, a private gym, a home office with a panoramic view of the city where I could build my empire. My new home was so spectacular it was featured on the cover of Austin Home and Design magazine. I started therapy, not out of sadness, but for growth. My therapist helped me unpack not just the betrayal, but the years of toxic family dynamics I had mistaken for love. The years of me being the provider and the fixer. My life was finally, completely, my own. And them? I followed the slow-motion car crash of their new life from a safe, sterile distance, through the inevitable grapevine of my mother's worried, whispered phone calls. It was exactly as I had predicted. A perfect storm of their own making. The economy took a slight downturn that year, and the market for luxury cars softened. Trevor's commission-based salary, which had been precarious even in the best of times, plummeted. According to my mother, he was barely clearing $3,500 a month. After the court-ordered $760 child support was automatically deducted from his paycheck each month, there was very little left for him to live on, let alone support a new family. They couldn't afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Austin. The city I was thriving in was now too expensive for them. So, Deirdre and the new baby, a little girl, had to move back home with our parents in their small 2-bedroom house in San Antonio. Our parents, who were retired and living on a fixed income, were now supporting 3 adults and an infant on my father's meager pension. The financial and emotional strain on them was immense. Trevor, meanwhile, was stuck in Austin with his job. He made the grueling, soul-crushing hour-and-a-half commute each way, every single day, in his gas-guzzling pickup truck. He was burning through gas money he couldn't afford, leaving before dawn and getting home long after the baby was asleep. Eventually, the pressure cooker situation at my parents' house became untenable. Deirdre's sense of entitlement and my mother's enabling clashed with the hard reality of no money. Trevor and Deirdre moved out. Not into a nice starter home. Not even into a decent apartment. They moved into a rented single-wide trailer in a rundown park on the dusty outskirts of San Antonio. $500 a month for a tiny, cramped metal box with thin walls and a leaky roof. It was all they could afford. My mother said they fought constantly. Vicious, ugly fights about money. He blamed her for pushing for the divorce so aggressively, for being so blinded by greed that she never considered the possibility of a prenup. She blamed him for being a lousy salesman, for not being able to provide them with the life she felt she was owed. The grand, all-consuming love that had justified their betrayal had curdled into bitter daily resentment and blame. It turned out their great passion couldn't survive the harsh reality of a shared bank account that was perpetually overdrawn. 2 years after that night at the steakhouse, my life was unrecognizable in the best possible way. I was now an executive director at my company, a position that came with a salary of $300,000 a year and a level of professional respect I had once only dreamed of. And I had found a real partner. I met Arthur at an art gallery opening. He was a successful architect, a kind, intelligent, grown-up man with a quick laugh and a quiet confidence. He had his own successful firm, his own ambitions, his own life. Our relationship wasn't built on need or dependency. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine partnership. We were 2 whole, independent people choosing to build something new and beautiful together. Then, about a year into my relationship with Arthur, I got a call from my mother. She was hysterical. Not annoyed, not placating. She was weeping. She lied, Carolyn, she sobbed into the phone. Oh, God, she lied about all of it. Mom, slow down. What are you talking about? Deirdre, she wailed. The baby. Trevor found something. In her closet. Receipts. She was never pregnant, Carolyn. It was all a lie. My blood ran cold. What? She was never pregnant, my mother repeated, her voice choked. She bought a fake pregnancy belly online. She was using, I don't know, fake ultrasound pictures from the internet. It was all a lie. She was planning to fake a miscarriage right after you gave her the divorce settlement money. Trevor, it seems, had finally caught on. He'd found the receipts for the silicone belly hidden in a shoebox. And he'd left her. Just packed his truck and disappeared. My mother was begging me, please, Carolyn, she has nothing. She's all alone in that awful trailer. She needs her sister. Please, she's your family. I stood there on the terrace of my beautiful loft, looking out at the city skyline, a city I owned. I thought about the pain, the humiliation, the years of sabotage. No, Mom, I said, my voice quiet and final. She's not my family. Not anymore. I told you the truth about her my whole life. You never wanted to believe me. Now you do. It's too late. I hung up the phone. And I blocked her number. A few months after that, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Trevor. Meredith. I know you have no reason to ever want to talk to me again, but I need to say something. You were right. You were right about everything. About me, about her, about the money. I was a weak, foolish man, and I destroyed the best thing I ever had in my life. I hope you're happy. You deserve it. I looked at the message for a long, long time. Reading that message didn't bring me a surge of satisfaction or a flare of anger. It just brought a quiet, final sense of closure. He had finally understood. But it was years too late. I had moved on so completely, had built a life so full and rich that his apology was like a letter addressed to a person who no longer existed. A ghost from a past life. I looked at the message for a moment, took a deep breath, and then I deleted it, without responding. My story isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about the profound and liberating lesson that when you finally stop propping up people who only want to use you, you have so much more energy, so much more strength left to build something truly extraordinary for yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a difficult journey, but one that ultimately led me to a place of strength and peace I never thought possible.